and welcome to another historical fiction authors chat. It's a big day today. Look who I have with me, Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. They are here to talk about The Phoenix Crown. And if you have not heard about that book and the two of them pairing up, you've been living under a rock because this has been everywhere. And I'm so thrilled that you both could be here today to chat with us.
Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, I'm so happy.
So much for having us here.
And I know that you guys are on a really busy calendar after this, so I'm very lucky to have you. So what I'm going to do, as always, I will read the two bios, and then I will read the synopsis, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. And readers, they already have something planned out. This is going to be great. And yeah, sit back and relax. I hope you all brought a cup of tea because this is a great little chat we're going to have. All right, for the bios. Janie Chang's historical fiction often has a personal connection, drawing from a family history with 36 generations of recorded genealogy. She grew up listening to stories about life in a small Chinese town in the years before the Second World War and tales of ancestors who encountered dragons, ghosts, and immortals. Her first novel, Three Souls, was a finalist for the 2014 BC Book Prize's Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, and her second novel, Dragon Springs Road, was a Globe and Mail Canadian bestseller. Both were nominated for the International Dublin Literary Award. Her third book, The Library of Legends, was also beautiful book, was also a Globe and Mail bestseller and a Book of the Month Club. And her fourth novel, Porcelain Moon, was named, which I have back here behind me somewhere, was named one of the 5 top historical novels of 2023 by the Toronto Star. Born in Taiwan, Janie has lived in the Philippines, Iran, Thailand, and New Zealand. She now lives on the beautiful Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, Canada, with her husband. And hopefully it's warmer there than it is here in Alberta. All right, over to Kate. Kate Quinn is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned a bachelor's and master's degree in classical voice. She has written 4 novels in the Empress of Rome saga and 2 books in the Italian Renaissance before turning to the 20th century with The Alice Network, The Huntress, The Rose Coat, and The Diamond Eye. All have been translated into multiple languages. Kate and her husband now live in San Diego with 3 rescue dogs. And Kate and I have that in common with the classical music. You knew that, right, Kate?
Oh, yeah.
She sings, and I used to play the oboe. It's been a while. All right, ladies, I'm going to disappear now and mute myself, and it's over to you. Enjoy.
We're going to start out, as usual, with a little bit of a reading from the very beginning of The Phoenix Crown. And this is a book, in essence, about the 2 very unlikely women who are thrown together and whose lives will be changed forever after they survive together the tumult and the fire and the chaos of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. So here you go, without further ado. Summer 1911, London. "A rose by any other name," someone quoted, and Alice Eastwood was hard-pressed not to roll her eyes. When it came to Shakespearean quotes about flowers, hang Romeo and Juliet, she preferred Julius Caesar. Nature must obey necessity. Because Mother Nature was a carnivore. She ate what she wanted when hunger made it necessary. Alice had known that in her bones since that day 5 years ago, when the earth shrugged its shoulders and a city cracked in half. "You've been on quite a pilgrimage of Europe's gardens and conservatories, Miss Eastwood. Will you return to San Francisco soon?" The question came from the director of the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew as he trailed Alice toward the Palm House with its great glassed layers like a crystal wedding cake. "I understand you've been invited to resume your old position at the California Academy of Sciences. Curator of Botany?" "Not yet. But she knew it was coming, the invitation to help rebuild the lost herbarium. Whether she could bear to accept or not, she hadn't decided, so Alice sped her footsteps to outpace both the question and her companion. She still had the vigor for the work, no question. Perhaps she was 52, but she certainly hadn't calcified with her advancing years. Whether heading up a California mountain to investigate a poppy field, hauling herself into a pack mule's saddle for an expedition in the Rockies, or striding along raked gravel paths of formal gardens, Alice Eastwood was always first on the scene. No, it wasn't the vigor she lacked. It was the heart. Set foot on that treacherous San Francisco earth again after what had happened there? The director hurried after her, a little out of breath. The Academy's herbarium was destroyed during the '06 earthquake, I believe. Such a loss to science. Yes, said Alice briefly, eyeing the palm house as though it were a thorny sample she had to yank out of the ground without her field gloves. She had a little bit of a thing about conservatories. She wasn't going to call it a fear, ever since that particular day in '06, but you couldn't be a botanist and have a thing about conservatories, so she squashed it down firmly and strode inside. Ah, the smell of vegetation, warm air, fern fronds. Life. The sun twinkled through the glass panes overhead. Paths wound under shading palms, and she thought she could smell the elusive scent of orchids. You have a sample of the Encephalartus altensteini I was interested in seeing. Yes, this way. Someday I'm hoping to lay hands on an epiphyllum oxypetalum, but a queen of the night? Alice didn't often veer from proper scientific names. It felt mildly rude, like addressing a woman by her nickname when you hadn't yet been formally introduced. But epiphyllum oxypetalum was special. Yes, the director of the Royal Botanic Gardens brightened, tugging at his whiskers. I've never been lucky enough to lay eyes on one, much less in bloom. Difficult when it only flowers for one night, eh? I've seen one bloom. Alice could see it now, a white exotic blossom opening slowly in a dark room, almost seeming to cast its own light, emitting a heady and indescribable fragrance. She remembered her fingers trembling as she touched one exquisite petal, remembered the look on the wet faces of the women around her. 4 women who could not have been more different, united in vast, wondrous awe around the miracle of that flower. Miracle had not seemed too momentous a word after what they had endured. Where did you see? Oh, long time ago. Alice fiddled with the Zeiss lens hanging around her neck on the same chain as her spectacles, bringing it up to her eye to examine a spot on a palm leaf. Let's see that Encephalartus altensteini.
Later, having said her goodbyes after being introduced to a dozen botanists and trading addresses for correspondence, I know of your interest in the Genista genus, Miss Eastwood, and would be happy to send you some samples. Alice wandered the lawns outside the palm house, clapping a hand to her flower-laden hat to keep it from blowing away in the summer breeze. The hat had come from Paris, made by a master embroideress at the Calot Atelier, the only remotely fashionable touch on a woman who would always rather carry a plant press than a velvet handbag. Her stride along the path was still brisk, but she hadn't outpaced the question after all. Will you go back to San Francisco? Alice found a bench nearby and sat, picking up a discarded newspaper and fanning herself. Later, she thought how random that was. She never read the society pages, and she shouldn't have seen that article at all. But the abandoned paper had been folded back on one of those gushy social columns, the sort that breathlessly reported which ball Lady So-and-so had attended in a gown of pale green Liberty satin and an 8-strand pearl collar, or which Earl's daughter had married in a cloud of mousseline and Valencian lace. Only it wasn't a description of a gown or a ball that caught Alice's eye on this bright summer morning. Phoenixes carved in rare blue and white jade, 57 sapphires and 4,000 pearls, butterflies fashioned out of kingfisher feathers, carved ivory queen of the night flowers. And she found herself reading, fingers clenched so tight the newsprint crumpled in her grip, reading it once, twice, her hands shaking, putting it down at last, staring blindly over the children bowling their hoops and the strolling women in their white summer muslins. Instead of banks of blousy roses, she saw a wall of flame, and instead of twittering birds, she heard the crystalline shatter of glass. She rose, not bothering to formulate a polite apology as she approached the first top-hatted gentleman hurrying past her bench. Excuse me, sir, I don't know London at all well. Where would I go to send a telegram overseas? The man stared at her uneasily before rattling off some directions, and Alice didn't blame him. She was drenched in icy sweat, white-faced and trembling. Alice Eastwood, who had not trembled as she climbed a railing 6 stories high over a shattered atrium in the old California Academy, who had laughed when she was nearly swept over a waterfall to her death at Cataract Gulch, but struggled out of the river with a handful of wet plant samples instead. Alice Eastwood, afraid? Very, she thought, as she hurried out of Kew Gardens, already parsing her words for that telegram. 3 telegrams, actually. One to New York, one to Buenos Aires, one to Paris, but all beginning with the same 4 words. The Phoenix crown, found.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm coming back in here. That's so exciting. Imagine that. All
And
right.
I swear, Kate, I didn't mean to have you read all the Latin words.
Oh, Kate, you're muted. You're muted, Kate.
Sorry, I was turned it off briefly because we had like a big rattling truck go by outside. Yeah, that was okay though. I remember I had to do all of the correspondence with a botanist friend from San Francisco about how to pronounce those Latin terms for the audio version of this book. It's one of those things you never think of yourself having to do about, when you're writing a book, is what are these things that will come up, these tiny technical details. But especially with audiobooks, you want to make sure you pronounce things right. And I don't know about you, but there's this sort of thing that a lot of readers have, or at least that I have, where you realize only usually at the moment when you have to say the word in a speech or when you're reading aloud to a large crowd, that you have only ever read this word. And so you have you can sound it in your head, but you realize you have no idea how to actually pronounce it. And then you realize you're fumbling horribly and it's looking very insensitive probably for not having looked something up in advance. So occupational hazard with readers is words that you have read but never spoken.
Oh, I had that a few years back when I was trying to read Gaelic. No clue. I just had to skip right past that. Well, there's so much to talk about here, you guys. There's for example, the co-authoring. Everybody wants to know how that started and all that. But I want to know the history. I want to know all about the earthquake and it all pulls together. So I'm just going to ask, and one of you has to answer. I don't know which one because I want to know whose idea this was. Who came up with the idea and approached the other one?
That actually kind of began with me. I've been wanting to do a book on the San Francisco earthquake for a long time because, and this is where, the history does tie into it. It is such a fascinating disaster in United States history. It's one of the biggest natural disasters this country has ever been hit with. There's huge, death toll, a huge property toll. There were a surprising number of famous people in town that were there for the event. It was hugely reported on. There were many, many, many on the ground reports, so much photography because we're in the era now when there were pictures of things being taken. And I always thought it sounded like, a really great, subject with lots of grist for a novel. But as I was looking at that and thinking, more and more, I really thought that it needed a Chinatown heroine because Chinatown in San Francisco was such a huge part of the city's history. It was so vibrant. It was completely destroyed by the fires following the earthquake. And I thought, having a Chinatown heroine would bring so much of that city history to life and into the forefront that didn't seem to be center stage in a lot of the other fiction about the quake in the city that I had read. And so I was wondering, I wonder if Janie is interested in this at all. So I sort of tentatively floated the idea, what would you think about this? Crossing my fingers. And, then she said.
And I said, give me 5 minutes to look things up because, was there a way to put a Chinatown hero into it? Could I have a character with interesting background, challenges, and struggles? Because as you know, Jen, it's conflict that makes for a novel, to make for an interesting story. And within 5 minutes, I'd gotten back to Kate and said, well, yeah, I think we got something here. And I think that was actually one of the really fun aspects of plotting out a story together, which was I had a Chinatown heroine. She lived in Chinatown, which was actually a very constrained kind of a life for a young woman in those days. Very rarely did Chinese women leave the confines of Chinatown. And Kate wanted to write an opera singer from the Midwest who'd broken free of her, life on a farm and had gone to New York to sing and was coming out to San Francisco to join a traveling opera troupe and how on earth were these two women going to get together and be part of a fun, exciting, adventuresome story? So that we were off to the races when we were tossing these ideas around.
Oh, I'm dying to hear the answer to that, or read the answer to that. My book should be here within a day, and then I will dig and I'll know all your answers. But had you heard of that, Janie? Had you heard of that point in history before?
I knew about the San Francisco earthquake. I knew vaguely that there had been a Chinatown in San Francisco. I did not realize a bunch of things until I did the research, and I'm sure you're familiar with this syndrome as well, that there's so much more to it, to discover that Chinatown itself had been burned to the ground, and that the Chinatown you see now is actually brand new, or brand new from 1908 kind of thing, and that it was deliberately designed and built to attract tourism and to provide a place where white Americans could come into Chinatown and feel that it was a friendlier, fun experience, and to get more involved with the culture, because up to that point, Chinatown was really vilified in the local media and by politicians as being, filled with dens of iniquity and opium dens and gambling salons and brothels, and it was all very bad PR for political reasons. And so the elders, the merchant elders of Chinatown, wanted to combat that. So as a result, they hired an American architect who then designed these buildings that sort of borrowed on what white Americans thought China must look like.
I just thought that was hilarious and ironic on so many levels, that they basically hired a white guy to say, can you build us like the Disneyland version of Chinatown, like the way that you would imagine it? And he said, well, what about a lot of pagoda roofs and dragon lampposts? And they're like, yeah, that looks nothing like home, but perfect.
Yes, and the really crazy thing is it was a success. People went to Chinatown and look, oh, wow, we're in this more exotic part of San Francisco. And it was so successful that Chinatowns in the rest of the US and Europe, around the world, took San Francisco as their template for building and designing their own Chinatown. So it became an architectural style.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Every place I've been, and when we go into China, it's always got the pagodas, always got the dragons, got everything there. It's fascinating that it came from there, from an American white guy. Oh, well. So then you've got the Midwest opera singer. How does she work into the story?
Well, that was really one of the things I knew I wanted to write from the beginning, was that this would be a great opportunity for me to write an opera singer heroine, which I've always wanted to do because I studied opera in college, and I sang for so many years of my life. And the whole idea of being able to write a heroine who did something I already knew something about, so it wasn't putting me in the position of, it's like, great, now I have to learn aviation or code breaking or, sharpshooting, just to be able to, connect with a fictional character. But here, at least, it's like I finally had something that I already knew something about. And and the reason that I wanted an opera singer for this book specifically is that the night before the earthquake, San Francisco was absolutely throwing its doors open for the social event of the season, which was a famous production of Carmen at the Grand Opera House in San Francisco, put on by the traveling opera company from the Metropolitan Opera of New York, and starring none other than the great Enrico Caruso.
Wow.
Who did, I would like to note, he only agreed to come here because he'd also come on the trip to San Francisco because he'd had an invitation to go to Naples, and he was a little worried that the Mount Vesuvius was looking a little rumbly lately, and he wanted to avoid the chaos of a potential eruption. So, he came to San Francisco to avoid chaos from the natural world. We'll see how that worked out for him. But the result was a fabulous production of Carmen the night before everything went to hell in a handbasket. And everybody who was anybody, was there in their diamonds, to hear Carrizo sing. And, a great many groundlings packed in as well, to hear get a glimpse of this great music. And so therefore I thought this is the perfect spot to put in an opera singing heroine. So I created my fictionalized character named Gemma. She is an early 30s opera singer who is really hitting her absolute peak vocally, but she's still, for various reasons, struggling in her career. She's in the chorus. She's looking at her chance to come to San Francisco and join the chorus of the Met and sing opposite Carrizo. This is all a chance to turn over a new leaf, which she badly needs, and hopefully get a jump start to her career. She has a voice actually quite similar to mine, so that way I could furnish her with all of the lyrics that all the potential roles and arias that I'd certainly studied for myself, maybe a little higher than mine. One of them is the Queen of the Night, which is a great famous Mozart role from the Magic Flute with a fantastic angry aria full of high Fs above high C.
And we don't do sampling today, Kate? No sampling?
No, I'm not ripping out that like right here in my Zoom chair. But she comes to San Francisco. She already has a friend who's living there. She thinks this will be a great chance for a new leaf. And almost at once, things start going contrary to her expectations. But she does come, and on her very first day, in fact, she bumps into a woman who is going to have a great deal of impact in her life, even though she doesn't recognize that at the time. And that woman, of course, is Janie's heroine.
Wow, that's so neat. It's all going to intertwine beautifully. So, and you got to see all of this stuff, or the new version of all this stuff, when you guys went on a huge research trip, right? What was that like? Janie, where did you guys go? I kept seeing it on Instagram and I was just drooling looking at where you were.
Well, we lucked out in so many ways, but we were also really, really organized about it. We had a spreadsheet because this was shortly after COVID. So not all the places we wanted to see, like the grand houses or the museums, were open all the time. So we had a spreadsheet laid out with all the opening times and the places and which ones were top priority that we had to go see and which days of the week they were opened. And we got it. Yeah, we got it. And Kate and I divvied up the work of contacting people like the California Academy of Sciences. They have librarians there. We love librarians, and told them what we wanted to research. And when we showed up, they were there with 2 library carts of materials, like original archived materials, for us to go through. And I had set up, through friends of friends, 2 tours of 2 magnificent mansions, because we wanted to see how people lived, the upstairs and the downstairs.
Right.
And the way it turned out, because they were friends of friends, we got to stay after hours and use one of the stately mansion's libraries after hours. And then for the other stately mansion that we went to, 2 curators showed up, and we must have been like a 4-hour behind the scenes tour on a day when the mansion was not even open to the public. And we were totally geeking out, let me tell you, because we weren't just geeking out for ourselves, going, oh my goodness, look at this dressing room that the mistress of the house had. It was like there were 2 curators and they were geeking out because they were talking about, restoration with old mansions and so on. And I have to tell you,
out until you've heard 2 curators, effusing to each other. Did you really replace those panes with authentic vintage 1902 window pane glass? And they're just absolutely fangirling all over the place. It was wonderful.
It was wonderful. And I just remember there was the second house that we went to, Carollands. We walked into this fabulous, kitchen. We were down in the kitchen area, and there was pots and pans and, copper pots and pans hanging down from the ceiling, sinks, marble countertops, a mezzanine upstairs with more porcelain and glassware and silverware. And Kate says, wow, this is a nice kitchen. And the curator says, this is the butler's pantry.
Oh, wow.
The way they lived. So, but the best part was we could go into a museum knowing that the other person was not going to tap their watch and say, how much longer do you want in this museum? Because it just wasn't going to happen. We were with another history geek.
That couldn't have been a more specific crowd there. That's awesome. Hey, did you have a favorite place where you were at?
Well, we had a wonderful experience in the fact that sometimes it's the unexpected that kicks your book in a whole new direction. Because one of the things that we decided to see on the tour was that we went to the Guo Pei exhibit. Guo Pei, if you haven't seen her work, she's a Chinese designer, fashion designer who specializes in these highly beautiful, intricate, hand embroidered, gowns, trains, robes, just the most beautiful stuff you've ever seen. And there's a huge exhibit of her fashion at one of the museums in San Francisco. It had nothing to do with the book. We decided to go just because we wanted to see it. And it was there and it was open while we were in San Francisco. And I guarantee you, if you haven't Googled Guo Pei, you've seen her work like on the Met Gala, red carpet, that kind of place. And we went in there and we were, walking around, just gobsmacked at these incredibly beautiful, intricate, three-dimensional embroidery with like gold and silver thread and pearls and jewels and fur. And by the time we walked out of that exhibit, we went from Janie's heroine, Suling, who, starts out as a young woman who works in her family's laundry in Chinatown and also does some seamstress work. She went from being a good seamstress who does piecework, to make a little money to, come on, we can make her a high-end couture level embroideress, can't we? And that turned the whole course of the book, especially Janie's heroine, Suling, into a new direction and gave us a whole new lease on exactly how the plot would go. And, we never would have probably done that if we hadn't just decided to see something at random on the trip that didn't even actually originally have anything to do with the book. Yeah. So it just goes to show you, like, no tangent, no research is ever wasted.
Yeah, it's those rabbit holes you disappear down that have the most gems in them, I find. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they really do.
And when we were there was a small but really interesting exhibit in San Francisco about the role of Chinese American women in history. So it was very much of the time of my heroine, who happened to be, because of her age, one of the first Chinese Americans born in the United States. So she was American. So it gave her this interesting sort of bicultural struggle that she was dealing with, where she was part of a Chinese community. She understood traditionally what was expected of her, but at the same time, she had been educated by missionaries because there were a bunch of mission schools inside Chinatown. So she knew that there were people who did not enter into arranged marriages. There were women who could be out there with their own careers. And of course, Alice Eastwood is one of our shining lights. She was a real character. She was the head of botany at the California Academy of Sciences during a time when really, a lot of women did not have much of a career beyond being school marms kind of thing. Right. So all of that was just, it just added so much to richness and authenticity to what we could pour into the book.
And Alice is, you heard us read her. The prologue is from her point of view. She is our historical character who was actually a real woman, and then we have our two main characters who are fictionalized, but very much based from the real history. So that's how the points of view work in this book. Mostly it is Gemma and Suling who tell the story, but we sometimes give a little bird's eye view to Alice, who is a really fantastic historical figure and who would have taken over the whole book, possibly, if we let her.
Okay, because I was going to ask how you went, whether you alternated or was it first person, third person? Like, did they see it from... When I do mine, I alternate chapters, but you guys didn't do one each, or how did it work working with the two of you? Who wants to answer that one? That's a tough one. That's a huge question.
Have we mentioned the word spreadsheets before this? Yes, we alternated chapters. It was close third person point of view for each of us. Kate wrote from Gemma's point of view, and I wrote from Suling's point of view. But the most important thing was that, unlike writing a book solo, where you can, where you have the freedom to wander off if you want, we actually did lay out the plot chapter by chapter. And even if each chapter was not, so detailed, at least we knew what were the main action things that would happen, and we knew what the beginning of the chapter would be and what the end of the chapter would be. And that way we could always dovetail onto each other's action.
Were you both write like that on your own? Like, were you both that good at detailing your plots beforehand? Kate, you're pretty much a plotter, right? You've always been.
I am a plotter, but not to this level. The need to co-write meant that we knew from the beginning we would have to be more disciplined about the plotting, and it made things a little easier since we did have the alternating chapters. But we knew that we didn't want to have to be constantly rewriting just because the other person had, gone on a tangent. So we had a couple of writing dates. A lot of this was done on Zoom, but fortunately for the time that we were writing together, I spent a lot of my time in Washington State, so we were only a couple of hours apart. So we got a couple of writing dates where we got together, in a hotel room or on my living room floor, and hashed out in that spreadsheet with our books, what is the timeline of this book? Because we had the earthquake as the central event of it that is going to kick a lot of things off, and it became, how far ahead of the earthquake do we want to start? And we realized from there as well, we could introduce a bit of a ticking clock here, where every single chapter begins with a countdown to the earthquake. Every chapter, it might be, I think, let's see, I've got it right here. The chapter 1 is 13 days, 14 hours, 52 minutes before the San Francisco earthquake.
Oh, wow.
And so that line on the spreadsheet would have been, okay, this is Gemma's chapter. This is her arriving in San Francisco. It's on this date. What is going to happen? And then the next row in the spreadsheet would have been chapter 2, which is then 12 days, 23 hours, 36 minutes before the earthquake. And for that one, then it's, okay, this is Suling's opening. What is happening with her? This is what she does during this chapter. This is how she finishes off. And then we would go back and forth, exactly knowing where the timeline was going, because we had to maintain that countdown to the earthquake and a tight, time schedules for our women to interact before they finally are thrown together by the quake itself. And the discipline of that, it required a lot of planning, but it was a lot of fun. And it meant that we didn't get thrown off too much when we started drafting, because sometimes, things, as the writing changes on you. You'll get taken in a different direction, but we never got taken so far away from the spreadsheet that it threw things off for the other person.
So is this going to help you going forward on your individual projects, Janie? Do you think that's you're probably a plotter too. See, I'm a pantser, so I can't conceptualize the brains you guys have, because I just do whatever. But you've told me before that you're a plotter, I think. But is the way that you guys spent so much painstaking time on this, is that going to help in your next solo operation? Although, Kate, I know you're already doing one. You've done one.
Well, like Kate, I have evolved to becoming more of a plotter, but certainly not as detailed as what we did for the Phoenix Crown. And I am thoroughly regretting that I did not plot as tightly for my work in progress, because I did veer in many different directions. There were things I didn't see coming, and there was the rip out 20,000 words and do something else instead. So I really I am sold on the benefits of plotting, especially when you're under a tight deadline. It doesn't take away from your creativity. It doesn't take away from sort of the theme or the messages you want to put in the book. I think in a lot of ways it challenges your creativity to stick to that story and still make it really interesting and vibrant and fast-paced if you can. It was a great experience because we also use Google Docs. So every time one of us finished writing our chapter, we would upload it to Google Docs. And it was like, I can't wait for Kate to post her next chapter.
Oh,
And I better write faster because I know Kate's waiting.
It was really good because in another way too, when you're working together, because Janie's already mentioned you have somebody to geek out with over the research, and that's really good because our poor spouses take a lot from us. I mean, like there they are, all they want to do is watch the hockey game or play a little Skyrim, and here we are saying, something going on for 15 minutes straight, like 7.9 on the Richter scale. Isn't that amazing? Then they're happy to go, yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, is there going to be any way to ask us at any point soon, are we going to be ready to eat dinner? And so we have someone to geek out with, and that's great. But also, so much the trouble when you're plotting a book on your own is you're bashing your head against, the wall, trying to figure out solutions to problems. And when you have someone to hash those problems out with, the answers come so much more quickly. So if it was one of those things like, how do we get our characters to meet before the earthquake when there's so few places geographically that they could cross paths? Like that kind of problem might take me days to figure out on my own. But if it was a matter of firing up a Zoom with Janie and saying, okay, let's troubleshoot this, we'd have an answer within, half an hour. That kind of thing. It's great when you have someone to bounce your ideas off of, because solutions will happen so much more quickly when there's two heads rather than one.
I can imagine. And
And
so,
you're not yeah.
go ahead.
And you're not second guessing yourself, right? Because you might come up with a solution and think, oh, really, does that make sense? Is it stupid? And then, but here you can say, Kate, is that stupid? No, I think that'll work. And
So my question with that was, when you're working on Google Docs, you're going back and forth and inserting your chapters. I was thinking, did you go through the chapter, like, Kate, would you go over one of Janie's chapters and adjust it, and vice versa? Did you guys like, oh, maybe she should do this, maybe like play with each other's chapters as well? Did you do some of those, or did you just leave them?
I think that's where you have to be a little sensitive about that, because I was even thinking from the beginning that, I don't want to like regard Janie's chapters as something I have a free hand to just start messing with. So therefore, if I read hers, I tended to just put comment bubbles on the side, just say, hey, think about this instead, or what about something like this, or I think this might contradict what I have in blank. But there were also places where there was crossover, like, and especially as the characters interact, like if I have her heroine in a scene that I'm writing, which is, I'm writing because I am writing the scene from my heroine's point of view, then I am going to have to come up with dialogue for her heroine. And in those places, sometimes I would write some dialogue and then I just put a note in the side that says, Janie, if you think there's a better way for Suling to say this, just go ahead and change it however you would like. Or if you think that there's no way she would think that, then, or there's no way she would say that, go ahead and replace it with something that's more likely. Or, sometimes I might just put something in brackets in saying something like, Suling says something along blank lines, just introduce this thought. And then Janie would go ahead and fill that in. And then, and so there was a little bit of like give and take there, because, she knows her heroine better than I do. And, vice versa. So I wanted to make sure that the voices then too are consistent across the dialogue, no matter who is writing which scene. And so we did a certain amount of that too, where it's like, please take free reign in these places so that we can maintain the voices of the characters really consistently.
That makes a lot of sense, because I was thinking about reading the whole book at the end. When I read my book at the end of it, I remember very little. I got, did I write that? I don't remember writing that sentence. Oh, good for me. And I thought, boy, if I were writing that with somebody else and I ran across it, I really would be a little discombobulated. Did I really write that or not? It's fascinating thinking about the two of you guys doing this together, back and forth, two brilliant minds and geeking out and learning all these things. Do you think you guys will try and do another one with someone else? Or do you think, was it that kind of I don't know, Janie, do you think that you're inspired to try more co-authoring, or are you going to go back to, well, as I call it, living in your own little shell?
Oh my goodness. Well, it was super positive experience, because one of the most important things that Kate and I wanted to make sure of, besides writing a book that would be enjoyable for people to read, was we wanted to come out of this still friends.
Yes.
That was actually more important, that we should stay friends. And so it was a good experience. Never say never. And I'm going to tell you, it's got to be with someone that you have a compatible work ethic, because both of us are kind of workaholics. Not once did either of us ever accuse the other of slacking off. The other thing, neither of us are morning people, so that really helps. Nobody wanted to troubleshoot at 7 a.m. We have a firm faith in spreadsheets and in using technology whenever possible to make our lives easier,
Yeah,
So
those things worked out. And I would say for anybody who was thinking about trying to co-write something with someone else, there's a lot to think about in advance, just in terms of the things like, if you're sharing, are you comfortable sharing your work when it hasn't been polished yet, when it's just a very rough draft? Because you're probably going to have to be comfortable with that. And are you going to be comfortable with someone, leaving comments on your early work, or do you want them to leave comments, or do you think, because I've known other people who co-authored who literally just write all over each other's stuff, and they will edit each other's prose, even if it in rough draft state. And are you comfortable with that, or are you not comfortable with that? So these are things that I think you probably want to think about before anybody would want to co-author, because writers are quirky, and we all have the ways that we like to work, except that since we've been working probably alone more than not, you would have to think, you probably haven't given a lot of thought to what are the things that you consider non-negotiables, because you haven't had to negotiate them with anyone.
Right.
So these are the things to think about before you ever decide to co-author something, because you might suddenly realize, hey, I'm the kind of person who is offended if someone changes even a comma without asking, but you didn't work that out in advance, and now someone has stepped on your hem without realizing it, and maybe then there are hurt feelings involved. So that didn't happen with us, because we were very careful in advance to say, like, okay, what do we want to do? What are we comfortable with? And we're both very thinking from the start, like, we really want to make sure that this is a fun experience and not just one that produces a book by the end. And but it worked out very well for us. But I do know that there are other co-authoring experiences that folks have had where there was no friendship by the end of it. And we really wanted to avoid that. Thank goodness we did.
Well, and I guess, Kate, you should also mention why you thought we would be good co-authoring, because we have been through the book tour from hell.
Janie and I actually met when our mutual publisher threw us together on a little 3-city, 3-author series of book events right after a conference in Portland. And they put the two of us together with another friend of ours named Jennifer Robson, and we were all going to do, 3 authors, 3 cities, 3 events. What could go wrong? Everything went wrong. If there was a flight connection, the connection was missed. If there was a car drive, then the air conditioning would break down, and then the tire would fall off. If there was, a drive to be made with a tight timeline, that was when the entire highway would shut down thanks to a flipped truck right off the ferry. It's like, if there was luggage, it would go missing. Everything went wrong. And yet we had so much fun on this trip. We got so much laughter out of it, so much grist, that we were all, wonderful friends by the end of it. And I kind of ended up thinking, when I first was looking at the San Francisco idea, if we managed the book tour from hell without wanting to, claw each other's eyes out, in fact, ending up better friends at the end than we were at the beginning, surely the odds that we could write a book together are actually pretty decent.
Yeah. Once you've seen the worst of it, you might as well make the best of it, for sure. I actually had a similar, in a way, it wasn't from hell, but 2015, my very first book tour ever. They sent me across, over to Victoria from Halifax. And so all the way across. And the night before I went to meet up with Susanna Kearsley, who I just adored, I got laryngitis. And so I texted her from my room and said, I can't talk. I don't know what to do. And she said, that's okay. I just broke my foot. So we had the I can't talk, I can't walk tour. And so she always made sure I had a microphone, and I pushed her through all the airport security. And yeah, they do bring you closer, for sure. Adventures.
The fun part about having these kinds of experiences with writers, though, is that the minute misfortune happens, like whether it's, that flipped truck or the ferry that's late, or, the fact that you're never going to make your event on time. The fun thing about other writers is that they immediately start spinning stories out of it. Everybody was immediately, every time we hit a roadblock, kind of saying, can I get a blog post out of this? Can we get some fun social media out of this? How can we spin this? How can we spin this as something entertaining for Instagram? It's like we all immediately are like story spinning the minute anything bad happens, because, in conflict, there is story. So
Right.
Therefore, that is one reason why writers are fun to travel with.
It's true. It's you can shut us up about the geeky stuff. I'm so grateful for you guys coming out and chatting today. I know everybody's going to love hearing all of your insight, and we're all waiting for Phoenix Crown. And I've been waiting for, I don't know, 6 months. Is that when you first announced it? Something like that? And you both, go ahead.
The book was actually supposed to be released in September,
Ooh.
and our publisher changed their mind. So now it's February 13th. And I hope everybody thinks that it's worth the wait. We really had a great time writing it. And we think it's a real ride, a real fun ride of a story.
I can't wait. So are you both working on something now? Kate, you've been working on something that's almost ready, right? Or is ready?
Yeah, I am. I have my next book coming out the same year in July. And again, it was originally supposed to be, Phoenix Crown fall last year, and then this book summer this year, and everything changed a little bit. So now I have 2 books in 1 year. But this is the next book is called The Briar Club. It is about an all-female boarding house in early 1950s Washington, D.C. And it's such a fabulous period. There's so much there with, McCarthyism, the Red Scare, the Lavender Scare, the Cold War, the Korean War, the end of the Women's World War II baseball leagues. There's so much. And I can't wait to share that book with everybody as well. So that's coming out July 9th, The Briar Club. And I'm actually just finishing up my final edits for it now.
Awesome. Yeah. What about you, Janie? Are you writing something now?
Absolutely. So just a few days ago, I handed in my really terrible first draft of a novel to my editor for an early read. And it's called The Fourth Princess. It's a Gothic novel set in pre-war Shanghai about the young wife of an American millionaire who moves into this abandoned mansion where no one has lived ever since the previous owner committed suicide. And she hires a young Chinese woman to be her secretary / companion / translator. And as they settle into the house, strange things happen and terrible secrets from the past are revealed.
Oh, you guys, this is exciting. I've got a whole bunch more books to read. That's excellent. So everybody that's watching this, now you know to look forward to all of these. And everyone is going to be reading The Phoenix Crown for now, and that's where all their hours are going. It's a nice thick book. I'm waiting for mine. But I want to thank you both so much for today, for making the time to chat with us and tell us a little bit about this experience. I'm jealous. I want to leap out and find a co-author now, because it sounds like it could be a blast. So you've inspired me. So thank you very much, both of you, and best of luck on your tour.
Thank you so much for having us. It's really wonderful to come back and be able to chat with you.
It was a fun time, Genevieve. Thank you so much.
Great to see you both. Well, take care, and best of luck with everything.